Today's video is going to be on angle pair relationships. And to start, we're going to talk about four important angle pair relationships. So the first one is complementary angles. And complementary angles are two angles whose measures have a sum of 90 degrees. So if we look at this first picture here, this angle that we can call A and this angle that we can call B are going to be complementary because when I take the measures, they're going to add up to 90 degrees. So 63 plus 23 is going to be 90 degrees. A lot of times we see complementary angles here. We see that these two angles are adjacent angles that form a 90-degree angle. So those are complementary. So we can say the measure of angle 1 plus the measure of angle 2 is going to equal 90 degrees. Okay? Supplementary angles are going to be two angles whose measures have a sum of 180 degrees. So again here, if this is angle A and this is angle B, these two angles are going to be supplementary because they add up to 180 degrees. All right. If we look over here, the measure of angle 1 plus the measure of angle 2 would equal 180 degrees. Okay, they form a straight line, which means they're supplementary. And we're going to talk about this again in just a couple of seconds. Vertical angles are two non-adjacent angles that are formed by intersecting lines. Vertical angles are congruent, okay, which if we remember from the last video, it means that they have the same measure. So here, angle 1 and angle 2, these would be vertical angles. So we have our intersecting lines, and they're the angles that are across from each other. So angle 1 would be congruent to angle 2, which we know means their measures are the same. We can also say angle 3 and angle 4 are adjacent angles. All right, that's another pair of vertical angles in that diagram. Okay, and then we're going to talk about linear pairs. So a linear pair is kind of a special type of supplementary angles. So it's a pair of adjacent angles whose non-common sides are opposite rays. Okay, we talked about opposite rays when we talked about straight angles, or an angle that's just a straight line that equals 180 degrees. Okay, so linear pairs are going to be supplementary. Okay, so again, we can say the measure of angle 1 plus the measure of angle 2 equals 180 degrees. Okay, so these are our four big angle relationships. We are going to talk about another relationship later on in these notes. All right, but just to practice with these four, what we're going to do is look at the diagram, all right, determine which relationship is shown, and then solve for x. Okay, so in number 1, we see that we have a straight angle. All right, we have a pair of opposite rays here. And because we have two angles that form a straight line, this would be a linear pair. Okay, I'm also going to say that they are supplementary there. I'm going to abbreviate both of those. But linear pairs are supplementary. Okay, if they're supplementary, we know they add up to 180 degrees. So x plus 103 equals 180, and x is going to equal 77 degrees. Okay. For number 2, we see we have a pair of intersecting lines. These two angles are across from each other, so they're going to be vertical angles. Okay, we know vertical angles are congruent, so x is going to be 85 degrees. Moving on to number 3, all right, this little box here tells us that we have a right angle. So these two angles are going to be complementary. All right, again, I'm just going to abbreviate. So x plus 32 would equal 90 degrees. So x is going to equal 58 degrees here. Okay. Number 4, again, we have intersecting lines. These two angles are across from each other, so these are going to be vertical angles, which means x is going to be 157 degrees because these two angles are congruent. All right, for number 5, we have another pair of complementary angles. All right, remember we can't say that that's a right angle unless we have that little square there, that box. Because it's there, we know this is a right angle. We know these two angles are complementary. So x plus 18 equals 90. X is going to equal 72 degrees. And for number 6, we have another pair of supplementary angles. This is also a linear pair. So I'm going to put both. This is a linear pair, which means we know they're supplementary. Okay, so x plus 65 equals 180. So x is 115 degrees. Okay. All right. So now that we kind of have the basics of those relationships, we're going to get into some more problems here. So the directions say to classify each of the angle relationships and then solve for x or x and y. Okay. So again, the biggest thing that you want to do is, or how you want to start these, is by finding the relationship. Once you know the relationship, then you're going to know how to set up your equation. So here I have two angles that form a straight line. That's going to be a linear pair. We can also say they're supplementary. Okay, so I'm going to take these two angle measures, 2x plus 14 and 6x plus 10, and set that equal to 180 degrees. So I have 8x plus 24 equals 180. And when I solve for x, we're going to get 19.5. Okay. If I look at number 8, I have two angles that form a right angle, so these are going to be complementary. If your angles are complementary, we want to add them up and set them equal to 90. So we're going to do that here. So we get 11x plus 13 equals 90, and x equals 7. Okay. All right, for number 9, we have intersecting lines. These angles are across from each other. So for vertical angles, all right, that's going to be our relationship. They're vertical. And remember, vertical angles are congruent. So we are going to set the measures equal to each other here. So I'm going to have 2x equals 22, so x equals 11. All right, and then number 10, we have two different variables that we want to solve for, so we're actually going to have two different relationships. So if I wanted to start by solving for x, I have x over here and x over here. Okay, so I see that these two angles they form a linear pair. They're supplementary. So that's going to be my relationship that I use to solve for x. All right, so 11x plus 15 plus 5x plus 5 is going to equal 180 degrees. So 16x equals 160, and x is going to equal 10. Okay, now I'm going to look back and try to find y. Okay, so I know that this angle here is 2y. Now I could do two different things here. I'm going to try to use vertical angles. So I could take this 10 and substitute it in to x in two different places. So I could substitute it in here or in this angle over here, just kind of to use another relationship. I'm going to substitute it in to this 11x plus 15 over here. All right, so I have 11 times 10 plus 15. That's going to equal 125 degrees. Okay, so I'm going to set 2y equal to 125 and y equals 62.5. Okay, so those were vertical angles, and I got 62.5. Okay. Now for 11 and 12, I don't have a diagram. Okay. For number 11, it says angle A and angle B are supplementary angles. Find the measure of both angles if the measure of angle A is x minus 8 and the measure of angle B is 4x minus 12. Okay, so I'm basically doing the same strategy I did in these first 4 problems on the back page, except it already tells me that they're supplementary. So x minus 8 plus 4x minus 12 is going to equal 180 degrees. So I have 5x minus 20 equals 180, and 5x equals 200. So I know x equals 40. Now here it's asking me to find the measure of both angles. So I'm going to take that 40 degrees and substitute it in it for x. So the measure of angle A is going to be 40 minus 8, which is 32 degrees. And the measure of angle B, 4 times 40 minus 12, is going to be 148 degrees. Okay, and these 2 angles are going to be supplementary. You can always double check by adding them to make sure that you get 180, which we would in this case. Okay. Now for number 12 is a common type of problem. It says find the measure of both angles if the measure of one angle is 12 more than twice the measure of its complement. So the wording here is a little tricky, but some key things that are going to be important is we have 2 angles, okay? So it says both angles, which means we have 2, and they are complements of each other. All right, so if they're complements of each other, they're going to be complementary. So I'm going to name these angles angle 1 and angle 2. Okay. Now, the first angle, all right, we're just going to say is x. All right, we're going to say the measure of angle 1 is x. And then it says the measure of the other angle is 12 more than twice the measure of its complement. Okay, so in other words, the measure of angle 2, all right, is going to be 12 degrees more than twice the measure of angle 1. So if the measure of angle 1 was x, the measure of angle 2 is going to be 2x plus 12 because it's 12 more than twice the measure of angle 1, which is its complement. Okay, so I'm going to set this x plus 2x plus 12 equals to 90 degrees. And when we solve, x equals 26. All right, so now just like in our last problem, I'm going to take that 26 and I'm going to substitute it in. So the measure of angle 1, that one's nice and easy. That's just 26 degrees. The measure of angle 2 is going to be 2 times 26 plus 12, which is 64 degrees. So the 2 angles here are going to be 26 degrees and 64 degrees. All right, again, you can add them up and make sure when you add them you get 90 degrees, which in this case you do. Okay, our last relationship that we're going to talk about is something that happens when we have an angle bisector. So we talked about segment bisectors, and a segment bisector was a segment, a point, a ray, a line, or something that divided a segment into 2 congruent pieces, 2 congruent segments. An angle bisector is going to be a ray that divides an angle into 2 congruent angles. All right, now it should be a ray because we know that rays are what makes up angles. So in this diagram here, if ray YW, which is this ray here in the middle, bisects angle XYZ, right, then it's breaking it up into 2 congruent angles, which means that angles or that angle XYW would be congruent to angle WYZ. Okay? If they're congruent, we know their measures are going to be equal. Okay, so we would set them equal. Okay, so for numbers 13 and 14, it says that ray BD bisects angle ABC. In each of the diagrams below, we want to solve for x for each of these. Okay, so if I look at number 13, if it's an angle bisector, I know those two angles are congruent. So angle ABD is congruent to angle DBC. So we're going to set them equal to each other. And we're going to get 3x on the right side, 36 on the left, and x equals 12. Now for number 14, again, ray BD bisects angle ABC. Okay, so there's a couple different ways that we can think of solving this. If I know that angle ABD is equal to 2x plus 7, all right, then this angle here also has to be 2x plus 7. So I have 2x's plus 7 is going to equal the whole angle, which is 106. All right, we can divide both sides by 2 to get 2x plus 7 equals 53. And when we solve for x, x is going to equal 23. Okay? All right, so that is it on angle pair relationships. Just a little review. We talked about complementary angles, supplementary angles, vertical angles, linear pairs, all right, which are going to be supplementary. And finally, we talked about angle bisectors, just like segment bisectors are going to bisect, in this case, an angle into two congruent angles. Thank you so much for watching. If you have any questions, you can comment below.